Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
It's my distinct pleasure today to have John San Giovanni joining us again for a talk on the mobile space that he's been so deeply involved with for the last 4 years as part of a startup. And John will be telling you some of his background, but as many of you know, he worked in Microsoft Research for 8 years as part of external research, funding a lot of great innovation in the mobile space. But more recently, John's a co-founder and now a VP of design, product design at Mobi, this startup. And he's got tons of great insights about the mobile space and what's going on there. So please welcome him.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Karen. Dude, so exciting to be back at MSR. Amazing. The 8 years that I spent in these halls were, the most exciting and illuminating that in my professional career, and it's always an honor to come back. As I would always say, when I would show up to work in the morning, I would show up to the building, and the average IQ would drop by 50 points, and then when I went home at night, it would spike back up. So, but it's an incredibly energetic place, and I continue to be inspired by the output not only of Microsoft Research, but of the intellectual horsepower of the employees. At Microsoft. It's an incredibly energetic place, and I continue to find it inspiring. So thanks for your hospitality, and looking really forward to spending some time today. We have lots of interesting things to talk about. So I think this talk today is going to be centered around a topic that is sort of all the rage right now, which is mobile advertising. And specifically, I decided to break the talk into 3 parts. The first is I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Mobi network because it was born in these halls and has a really kind of interesting tale. It's a spin out. And we'll talk a little bit about how the incubation process inside Microsoft Research and then how it spun out to be this independent entity. Second of all, I want to talk about this phenomenon that's fairly new called mobile engagement advertising, in the sense that we tend to simplify the types of advertising as words or banners or microsites. And actually, I think that if you look at the different segments of advertising, there's a very interesting new segment emerging within the context of mobile devices and mobile apps. So I'm going to talk about that, and that'll sort of anchor the talk. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little about what happens next. And my intention for that portion is to have it be very much of an audience-driven conversation, talk about whatever in mobile or in mobile advertising you have an interest in or you have questions about. But also, I do want to address a couple things. I'll address Windows Phone 7. Also want to talk about HTML5 and what's happening there. But I really want that to be an audience-driven conversation. So first of all, I want to kind of talk about this space of artifact. There we go. The space that I call superphones. And we actually try to recast if you stratify the different mobile devices, kind of feature phone, smartphone, superphone. I think a lot of times people dump all these devices in as smartphones, but I actually think that superphones are distinctly different in a bunch of ways. First of all, they're largely consumer focused. When you think about a smartphone value proposition, for years and years that was very much around email and messaging and enterprise workers, whereas superphones, iPhone, Android, Windows Phone 7, Palm WebOS, others, are very much about apps and social and communication, and they're really as much targeted for consumers as they are for knowledge workers. But this is all predicated on this, kind of new platform, set of platform features, which means, kind of rich media capabilities, robust development tools, hardware-accelerated graphics, full fidelity browsers, all these things that have come together to really create a new category of device. So, I think for a long time, every one of these discussions about mobile phones or about mobile advertising sort of devolved into an iPhone love fest. And I think now it's time to recast that conversation and kind of talk about it as a segment of the marketplace, because there's a bunch of players in the market. And it's an interesting way to kind of look at this industry. So that's the context. And we actually coined this term over a year ago now, and now it's been picked up by Google and by venture capitalists and others that are using this as a way to talk about this. So yeah.
John, is the difference between, like, say, Brew and this, is it just that the innovation capability for developers is different? Is it because Brew was pretty much consumer-focused, app store-driven, Qualcomm?
Sure. Sure, fair point. I think the caveat is that so the question was, what about something like Brew, which was consumer-focused once upon a time in the Qualcomm universe? And I think the answer is that it's all about frictionless distribution of these little app experiences. Like, for example, on Windows Mobile back in 2000, I was on a subway in New York and downloaded a cab file of a subway map and was using it. And that was an app that was designed for consumers that was, a decade ago. I think now what we're seeing is that there's because an end user developer or a publisher doesn't have to flow through carrier relationships, doesn't have to try and get placement on a deck, that frictionless distribution channel, together with really robust development capabilities, has really forged a new category. And it's also the hardware, right? It's a direct manipulation touchscreen. If you Google Superphone, I sort of laid out a bulleted list of how we define what the Superphone segment is about. It has location-based services through real GPS. There's a collection of specific platform features that really define something as a Superphone in our eyes. But I think it's kind of an important way to kind of segment the industry. And these are the 5 devices that the Zumobi network addresses. We're on BlackBerry, and actually the new BlackBerry 6 platform that just shipped with the Torch is a real honest-to-goodness Superphone platform now, I think, for the first time. The Palm Pre WebOS platform and the Pixie as well. Of course, iPhone, iPod Touch, Google Android, and soon Windows Phone 7, and we're excited to be working on that platform now. So mobile advertising sort of goes with that explanation, but if you're not in this space, this is an incredibly exciting time in mobile advertising. I think there's been a lot of false starts around mobile advertising, and everybody said that sort of next year is the year when mobile advertising would become real. From our perspective, that was last year. 2009 was really the year. And the way we qualify that is it's when the advertising spends from the agencies move from sort of the experimental budget, where they sort of throw a lot of things against the wall, to where it's an actual line item in the advertising budget, where they're actually spending real dollars year over year around a brand on mobile. And these numbers reinforce that. And importantly, the app space specifically is an incredibly hot space in the segment of mobile advertising. 52% of Superphone users claim they've acted on an in-app ad. 18% have made a purchase directly from an in-app ad. It's a very kind of active audience. And in fact, so much so that we have partnered really nicely with Microsoft Advertising to be able to take some of our inventories. We have a lot of Microsoft-specific properties, as you'll see, but even the properties that aren't Microsoft-specific content properties, we're collaborating with the Microsoft advertising team for them to sell as part of an integrated buy. So a lot of times these campaigns will be across Bing and the Xbox, dashboard, and also on the Superphone app. So that's sort of a nice integrated way to do an integrated buy across multiple platforms. Okay, so I want to kind of set up for the context of the talk and provide a thesis for what I'm going to talk about in the context of our brief time together today. When we look at advertising in general over the course of 100 years, if you look at kind of key media pillars across that time, usually there's this continuum between brand advertising and performance advertising, right? So if you look at television, obviously the line is here. The vast majority of advertising on television is, network spots. There's a tiny sliver of performance-oriented advertising, which is like QVC or late-night infomercials, to which I'm uncontrollably drawn. But for the most part, it's all about 30-second spots, about brand advertising, about product launches, stuff like that. If you look at the web, the exact opposite, right? The vast majority of web buys are performance-oriented. Search words, CPM, cost per click, stuff like that. It's very, very much a performance-oriented medium. And there is some segment of microsites or viral video campaigns. I mean, that still happens. The agencies are still partying in that place. But the split is the opposite, which leaves the question, which of these things will mobile be? And if you look at mobile, I think most people are predisposed to believe that the split looks a lot like it does on the web. And I think that if you were to categorize those, it would look something like this, where you have, a vast majority of, again, search, CPM, cost per click, some local map-oriented advertising, and then there's a little sliver of what we call kind of advertisements, which is different than what Zumobi does today. We did a couple of them in a previous life, but this is really branded apps, where you actually go and you download the Pepsi app or the Tide app or the BMW app, and you shake the phone and something fun happens and you show it to a friend, but for the most part you uninstall it within 48 hours. So that's kind of brand advertising on mobile, but it's all about downloading and ingesting that brand icon on your home screen. The space that we're focused in, and the space that is, we've been focused in really for the last 2 years, is this intermediate segment here, which, I'll refer to as sort of mobile engagement. And the reason why this is different is that it's kind of, in many ways, the best of both worlds. It is not a freestanding app. It's actually a little app within an app. So it's served as part of another content property. So you might be in the official app for the Today Show, and then when you go into the recipes section, you'll have a call to action to drill in and have a brand experience around, a food brand or about, so that's really what this engagement-oriented advertising is. But it has the best of both worlds because it has very deep engagement advertising. You can do video playback, social media interop, response forms, a lot of the things that you would expect to find in a branded app, but it's very targeted because it's served as part of an existing audience that's already using an automotive app or already using a gaming app or something like that. So in that way, it's very nice in the sense that it's very targeted. And of course, it also has incredible metrics on the back end, so you know exactly how much time somebody spends in the different portions of that experience. And it's very lush, kind of very creative. So the good news is that this new segment of advertising is, I think, in many ways the best of both worlds. The challenge is that it's complicated because you do need some creative horsepower. It's not sort of a self-service, fire and forget form of advertising, and there's a lot of complexities to the ecosystem to make those types of advertising work. This is, again, all over the news right now. You've certainly seen iAd. As I mentioned, our Brand Blast platform has been squarely in this space for 2 years, and we have a lot of learnings from that, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail.
Engagement space?
Totally, yeah. It's sort of, an app within an app is another way to describe it. So you go into an app that you use every day because you have an affinity towards some segment of content, and then inside that content, you get an integrated brand experience. It's not a banner, it doesn't throw over the wall to a browser, it's an in-app, kind of brand experience. I'll show you some examples.
How does it differ from the advertisement?
So the advertisement is sort of a brand experience in and of itself, that you go to the App Store and you search for Tide and you install the Tide, Stain Buster app or whatever, and that's sort of the value proposition is around the advertiser themselves. And usually those apps are built by an agency, and they have typically a fairly short life. It'll have a couple of weeks of activity around a new car launch or something like that. And the user isn't likely to kind of keep that on their home screen month over month over month. They're more likely to sort of experience it and then go away. Whereas mobile engagement advertising is going to be served into a content property around that same time. But the content property will stay on their phone for months or years.
So it's still a contextual discovery. It's not a motivated discovery like an app store. You don't go because you're an Audi guy.
Right, intentionally. Because you don't want to just attract people who are Audi. You want to go to the automobile app and serve, kind of an Audi brand experience inside the context of that audience. That's right. And I'm not saying that there's not a market for that other segment. I think advertisements will live on in some segment. That's an agency business. That's just not the business that we're interested in. And curiously, no one's really. iAd is really in this space, and Brand Blast is in this space. But this is a very important space, not just in the context of iPhone, but in mobile software going forward, because I think this funds some very interesting directions in mobile. So I'll speak to that briefly. Just for context, many of you have kind of followed the Zumobi adventure since we were part of Microsoft. But just to get you up to speed of sort of where we are now, Zumobi is kind of the premium mobile app network across all the platforms that I showed before, kind of in the superphone space. But importantly, we kind of think about this space very differently. First of all, the way that the model works for us is that we don't, it's not like Motor Trend approaches us check in hand and says, hey, we want you to build a mobile app. No, we're an advertising company. So, Mercedes-Benz will approach us check in hand and say, we're interested in this audience. We're interested in, automotive enthusiasts who are, in this age range and this gender, and we want to really speak to that audience. And then Zumobi will then, in turn, look for current properties that are already in our network or new properties that we can approach and bring into the Zumobi network that really address that audience. So in this case, Motor Trend is a perfect example where it's, squarely in the target audience of that Mercedes was looking for. And then we work collaboratively with the Motor Trend editorial team to lovingly craft a Motor Trend content experience. We put it into one or more app stores across the platforms that Motor Trend and Mercedes are interested in. And then the app goes to market coincident with a campaign, and that basically funds a portion of the development of the app, but the app lives on and attracts an audience going forward. This is cool for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's good for everyone because Mercedes gets exactly the audience that they wanted. It's good for Mobi because it's a very lucrative targeted advertising buy. It's good for Source Interlink, the publisher of Motor Trend, because not only do they get a revenue share on that advertising revenue, but they also get an app for free. And it's actually good for the end user because the end user gets an app that might have otherwise been $1 or $2. They get that app for free, and instead of getting sort of assaulted by banner advertising, they get this very elegant, kind of lovingly crafted branded content. So it's a really, really nice ecosystem in that way. And we've focused our business exclusively on that. So we've done this model a bunch of times now. We did the official app for MSNBC, the official app for Today's Show, a bunch of sporting properties in partnership with the Sporting News, the official app for Xbox, which I'll talk about, the official app for Better Homes and Gardens, the TLC, Television Network, Parenting Magazine, Automobile Magazine, American Idol, a bunch of these properties that really are attracted to this model of, it's an advertising business. And I would say that this model of advertising really speaks to an interesting future of mobile software in general, because the reality is that it is extraordinarily hard to make a business out of a content app, given that so many of the apps are free, that there's very few consumers that are willing to pay more than a couple bucks, if anything at all, for a content app. Games, totally different. This conversation is not about games. I think people will pay for games. But for content apps, we believe that the most lucrative option for a publisher is to use this kind of integrated high-value sponsorship, mobile engagement advertising. So that's our observation. And that kind of gives you context of where we are today. So I figured in telling the story of Mobi, it's sort of interesting to see where we are today. It has an interesting backstory. You might not have known that Microsoft owns a portion of one of the largest superphone app networks, and how is that the case? So we'll talk about that, but I wanted to start with where we are today, and then we'll go back and tell you how we got here, sort of Christopher Nolan style.
So are those apps that you put in there that you publish, are they apps within the apps, or are they the apps themselves?
Those are the publishing properties, and this will become more clear when you see examples of each. So every one of those that I showcased in that string, and I intentionally made them microfiche because we'll talk about them later. Those are the actual publishing properties, and those live on. If you have an iPhone or Android or Palm WebOS device in your pocket, you can search the App Store for Mobi, and you'll get one or more of these apps. So this story has an interesting genesis. As I mentioned, it was born inside Microsoft Research, and my role at Microsoft was a really interesting and exciting one. I was actually recruited in 1999 to be focused exclusively on mobile. I've worked in mobile and specifically in mobile content my entire career. And my role was split up into three very distinct elements at Microsoft. So the first one was kind of academic grant funding and research around mobile researchers. So the goal there was to try and get mobile research scientists excited about Microsoft platforms. And I was actually mentored from a bunch of old school Microsoft evangelists from the old legendary developer relations group, Todd Needham and others, that helped sort of teach me how guerrilla evangelism works. So one of the things that I'd do is I'd show up to an academic conference and see who the best presenters were that were doing interesting things on other mobile platforms, Java J2ME or Palm. And then by the time they got back to their university, they returned from Copenhagen, they show up to their office, and there's a care package from Microsoft with a classroom full of Pocket PCs and dev tools and books, and lo and behold, their next research project was on Microsoft platforms. So it was a very cool evangelism strategy. You remember these devices? So this was some of the devices. Remember, I started in '99, so this was an interesting progression of mobile devices, and it's a cell phone, but it's also a mobile computer together. Microsoft was country before country was cool, as the song goes. So that was part of my job, and that was a lot of fun and had a lot of impact on the marketplace. And in fact, specifically, the .NET Compact framework and Microsoft mobile devices in general really became the primary way that academic research scientists did dramatic things on mobile after 8 years of this focused effort. The second thing was more traditional large format event delivery. So I traveled all over the world, in some cases more than 90 city stops a year throughout the US and Europe and India and China, doing talks about Microsoft mobile strategy, and to 70 to 7,000 people. And that was really fun and incredibly, again, illuminating to kind of see what people were doing, dramatic things people were doing with Microsoft platform technologies. And it was a lot of fun. And I think we catalyzed a lot of really great innovation in mobile in general. So that was really thrilling. The third thing that I did was this concept of themed research partnerships. And Microsoft Research does this to this day, where it's really a highly focused, multi-year, million-dollar research agenda focused around a specific theme. And the two that I'll talk about, one is I had a relationship with the NYU Center for Advanced Technology, specifically around Ken Perlin. And that was around this really cool kind of single-handed gestural text input system, which, don't worry, I won't talk about today. Those of you in this room are sick of hearing me talk about that. But it actually was a really cool system. It was focused on kind of the expanding sphere of high-speed texters. And it was a really novel, non-handwriting, non-speech, non-typing, eyes-free way to do, in some cases, 40 words per minute with one hand without looking. It was designed for the kind of teenage mutants in Helsinki, but it was actually really pretty cool. In fact, Bill Gates, freakishly good at this. He picked it up, first try, Bill Gates. I get it, no errors. The guy's a badass. So anyways, that was a really cool project. And the second thing that we did was the University of Maryland Human-Computer Interaction Lab was doing interesting work around zooming user interfaces, consumer interfaces for consuming content. And specifically, Ben Betterson and his team at Maryland was incredible. And so we started funding the center, and then Amy Carlson joined soon thereafter and was an important cornerstone of that partnership as well. So that actually is the catalyst to what became what is now Mobi. This was something called Launch Tiles. So we worked together on this concept, this project of, what if your cell phone had a big touchscreen, and this was 2004. So, what if your cell phone had a big touchscreen and you were able to download these, we called them tiles, but essentially apps over the air, and you could consume them using a really sexy kind of hardware-accelerated graphics interface for consuming this content. You could customize your home screen however you wanted to. You could virally send those tiles to other friends. There was a big social media component to it. It was a really, really fun project. And it's important for me to pause here and say that this was an incredibly cool, cross-disciplinary, cross-divisional, collaborative effort. There were many people far smarter than I am that had, kind of significant contributions to this work. So central among them, Dr. Ben Betterson, who many of you know, who to this day is actually the chief scientist of the Mobi network. He's still at the University of Maryland in College Park, Maryland, but he's out in Seattle every month or so, and still provides that UI perspective and that rich research perspective. Amy Carlson, who's in the room, was actually the first author on the academic paper about Launch Tile that was nominated for Best Paper at CHI in 2005. And it's because of her diligence and follow-through that she kept Ben and I in line, and the thing was built at all. And then lastly, Aaron Clamage, who you might not know, but who's a brilliant developer at the University of Maryland who lovingly crafted much of the code. I also want to mention not only Daniel Robbins, who actually was the co-author of the core patent of this system because he had done the zone zoom work that inspired this design, but the rest of the Vibe team and really all of MSR. I mean, we had incredible access to, Andy Wilson and Dan Rosenfeld, people all over the company who provided incredible input on this. So this was, I just want to make it clear, this was an incredibly collaborative effort across the entire company. At the time, it wasn't deemed to be a strategic imperative on the product planning. And that's not a criticism. The product teams are very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. There's different focuses. At the time, think about it, 2004, the theme was very much about BlackBerry compete. It was very much about knowledge workers and about sort of taking market share away from BlackBerry. And at the time, there was probably a lot more revenue opportunity there than there was in kind of consumer or advertising opportunities. So when it was determined, together with the Windows Mobile senior executive management, specifically Yachin, that it wasn't necessarily a perfect direct fit for Windows Mobile's product family, then we did something very exciting. So I want to pause there for a second. I want to show you where it was because it's an interesting progression to watch. And so this is the conference video of that original design made in 2004.
The launch
And,
tile zoom space is divided into 9
so you can see there's this
zones of 4
zoom space,
tiles
and
each.
there's these tiles,
The home view shows the 4
and you
tiles
can
in
sort
the
of
center
zoom
of the
in and out.
space.
This
From
was actually
here,
the first
the
time
user
that
can
anybody
pan
had
around
used
with the
this
view snapping to
kind
each
of
4
concept
tile
of a
zone,
physical
either by
space
using
on
the
top of a little
multidirectional
pane
pad or
inside
dragging
a
the zoom
window,
space
but
itself.
also this direct
A large
manipulation
blue zoom
dragging,
widget
which now, of
provides a
course, is
visual frame of
commonplace on mobile
reference for the
phones.
user.
This is one of the
By
first times
tapping
that
blue,
this
the user
interaction
toggles
technique was
between
ever
4
employed on a
tile
mobile
zone
phone
view and the entire
for
36 tile
tiles
zoom
on a screen. It was
space.
used for map
From any
navigation.
zone, a
It
user
was used
then
for other
taps one of
things,
the 4
but
tiles to descend
so anyways,
into that application.
this was really the basic concept of launch tile, and this is it across platform on other devices as well. So that was kind of an interesting blast from the past. So pressing forward, this is when we should mention the Microsoft IP Ventures program, because this is a very cool release valve where they basically determined, all right, if this isn't in the immediate product plans, mobile advertising is an important segment, consumer-focused content is a very important segment, and it's an incredible credit to LCA and to the patent team who said, let's work on a packaging effort to package this up and spin it off to an independent company. So that's what was done, and all of these individuals were central to that, specifically Sharif Mansour, who navigated the very complex technical, business, and political landscape to really package this up effectively. Also, Jim Cooley, who was the technical advisor inside IP Ventures, who eventually joined the venture and became our chief technology officer for a number of years. David Harnett, who's running the group at the time, and Brad Brunell and Todd Herman, who really brought an advertising business model perspective into the mix. And this program was successful. They launched a bunch of companies, actually, very exciting. And we still have regular interaction with the IP Ventures group. In fact, they, to this day, have board observer rights on our board of directors, and they show up to almost every board meeting and participate and provide input and feedback. So, this is a whole dimension of Microsoft partnership that most people don't recognize. Microsoft has, been incredibly objective and effective at being able to bring ideas like this to life. So then that brings us to ZenZui. You might have heard ZenZui. We eventually rebranded to Zumobi because consumer insight tests showed that ZenZui was either an Asian restaurant or a spa, and nobody thought it was a mobile startup. So we rebranded the company. But this was exciting. We were funded by Oak Investment Partners, largest private equity firm in the world, Covera Ventures, and also Microsoft, as I mentioned, still has an equity stake in the company in exchange for the intellectual property that we took out of the company. And this is just a snapshot of some of the important people outside of the Microsoft gene pool that helped really, bring this product into a network. And so at the top is Tom Huseby, a Seattle area wireless venture capitalist. Everything that you'd want a VC to be, Tom is those things. And all the horror stories you hear about VCs, he's none of those things. He's an amazing professional. He's also incredibly smart and technical. And then a whole group of other people that helped advise and direct the company. And the bottom picture is Ken Wilner, our current CEO, who's one of the top people in the planet on mobile advertising. He ran mobile advertising at AT&T for years, and it was really his vision that brought us into this network. So let me stop there and show you what Zumobi was when it launched, because that's also kind of a fun thing. You see, the first video you see is this very researchy zooming UI prototype, and then that leads to, in early 2007, this. So I won't subject you to the rest of the music. But the point is that we made incredible progress. We got faster. We got real brands. In fact, every one of the brands that you see there is Tiles. In many cases, that was their first foray into mobile. This was the first mobile app for MTV and for NPR. We had incredible partnerships with Nike on the brand side. I mean, it was a really, really fun adventure. And importantly, it really put us in the app headspace way before anybody else was in the app headspace, because we were thinking about how the advertising model should work. We were thinking about the technical problems, the feed processing on the back end, the ad serving issues. It was a very exciting time. And in fact, it was an incredibly complicated piece of software. So it had, we had a cross-platform tile SDK, it had resolution adaptation, we were running on Windows Mobile and BlackBerry, full metrics reporting, including offline metrics reporting, which still isn't even done, local caching, zooming UI. At the time, the .NET Compact Framework team claimed that it was the most complex piece of software ever written on the .NET CF. So it sounds great, right? What could possibly have gone wrong at this point? Well, it was to use that experience with all those features on that hardware, it was pretty craptacular. Thank you for your nods. I appreciate your candor. But it was basically the platform crushed under the weight of all these complexities. And what we really wanted was a more focused content experience or a more powerful computing platform. So we led to this strategy, which we called Mobi 4, which was really interesting because rather than thinking about selling the consumer on getting a player and then having them select tiles inside that player, we said, why don't we curate some tiles around a specific content category, and then let's get it advertising financed, and let's distribute it as an individual module. Again, you can see how this is a very clear waypoint to the Mobi network as it lives today. It really got us thinking about content, thinking about merchandising content, and actually with this, sorry about that, with this we actually, this was when we launched our cross-platform effort, where we went BlackBerry and Windows Mobile. The initial plan was to do Symbian next because there was an effort in Aachen to get .NET onto Symbian, a Microsoft effort. But ultimately, the marketing environment was better for BlackBerry. So we did the official app for the Beijing Olympics. And this was the first app that we did across all three platforms. So we did Windows Mobile, BlackBerry, and then at the last minute, as part of a skunkworks effort that was going in parallel, we took the same tile code and we actually shipped a version for iPhone as well. And this was not the modular, expandable, zoomable tile interface. This was a specific zooming UI around the Olympics content, the same content that was in the other phones. And so we had invested, we were a top-tier .NET partner. We'd invested tons of effort into this kind of big platform. And then we launched this literally less than a month after the App Store went live. It was actually the first advertising-sponsored content app in the App Store. It might be it's interesting in retrospect to talk about what percentage of usage were. So again, the App Store had been open less than a month. How many users do you think iPhone would get? 15%, 20% of the whole? Rather than telling you how many users that got, I'll tell you how many users the other two platforms got. It was pretty staggering. So fully 98% of the usage was on this crazy, strange new platform. And that was, from the perspective of our board of directors, it was staggering with regard to how important this was going to be in the marketplace. And so we decided to take advantage of all the back-end feed processing and ad serving technology that we had built, all the expertise that we had built. But as a credit to our investors, to our board, and frankly to Microsoft, we decided to very briskly move toward this superphone segment and take a position of strength and a position of leadership very early on. And we did that. So the second app to ship on this platform was we did a snow and ski conditions app, which was sponsored by REI, and we actually have updated this year over year. They're actually sponsoring it now for the fourth season. And so, this became a very real media channel. Exactly what we thought was going to happen in 2004, but as always happens with startup, it took a very different path to get there. So it's been, quite an exciting ride since then. But we've tried to retain that sort of culture of innovation around user experience and around user interface. So we invented this UI, which is the Zoom Canvas UI. It's an interesting way to, in the case of the Today Show, they have all these different content categories around, celebrities and food and people and relationships. And how do you create a home screen that consumes that content without it being kind of a postage stamp home screen? So we came up with this very sexy sort of, direct manipulation home screen where you could just navigate around. This is all fake, of course, but it's smoke and mirrors. But the point is that there was a really sexy sort of way to navigate around a very large body of content very efficiently. And it was also very engaging. It was a cool browsing experience. And you can imagine how many advertisers want to be connected with the Today Show as a brand. So this really helped to inform this mobile engagement advertising system. We went on to do the official app for Rachel Maddow, also Zoom Canvas. We did the official app in partnership with MSNBC, their signature app. Used this very sexy radial menu for filtering content categories. And that has been a top news app in the App Store now for several years. And we did, in partnership with Microsoft, the official app for Xbox, which, again, a very attractive audience. And it was great for the Microsoft advertising team, because if they got in the door to sell an advertising relationship for the Xbox console, they could also add on sponsorship in the app for the content. So it was a very, very cool experience. And this app was great. It had, it wasn't an app for actual gaming on the phone. It was about the lifestyle of console gaming on Xbox. So it showed your avatar, the full-body avatar design. It had, if a celebrity was online playing, it would tell you what they were playing and when they'd be playing it. It was a very, very cool system. The podcast, all of that was kind of integrated into the Xbox experience. And this strategy works. So the nice thing about this kind of an advertising-based strategy is because we have aligned objectives with the partner, we have to make that app stay on their home screen month over month over month. We have to, when Apple releases a new iOS, we have to update the app to address that iOS. And the publisher might or might not pay us to do that. It doesn't matter. We're going to do that work because we want to stay ranked highly. And we've had 12 apps in the top 10 of their category in the App Store, 10 apps in the top 5. So the story, again, has a happy ending. It's been a very exciting journey. And it's been cool to partner with Microsoft. In that just brief journey, you learned about a platform partnership and a sales partnership and an intellectual property partnership and a content partnership, all rolled up into sort of the ecosystem of mobile engagement advertising. Okay, so changing now, let's talk a little bit about what this means. What is mobile engagement advertising? What are some examples? So it turns out that Mountain Dew did this really cool campaign they called Green Label Art. And it was really cool. They basically had these graffiti artists. They found these edgy graffiti artists from all over the world. They had them reimagine the packaging of the Mountain Dew bottle, these really sexy aluminum bottles, which are actually hard to find. They're kind of a collector's item. And then they wanted to try and create a brand experience around it. And initially, they approached us to do a branded app, to do advertising. At the time, we did a little bit of that as well, if the numbers were right. We don't anymore, but they approached us to do a branded app, and we said, well, wait a minute. Why do a branded app in the App Store, and you're going to scramble to try and get this kind of youth audience that you're trying to target with this campaign, whereas we have almost 1 million users that are partying on the Xbox app every day. Why not leverage that audience and just create a brand experience inside the Xbox console that echoes this? So that's exactly what they did, and it was wicked. It was actually, to this day, one of the coolest mobile ads I've ever seen. So every one of these artists had their own card, just like the cards that you'd see for a video game inside the dashboard of the app. They each had their own card. You could drill in and see other examples of their artwork. You could read about their bio. You could see other products that they made. You could register to win those products, all inside the context of the app. It never threw you over the wall to a browser. And importantly, it's so organically integrated into the app content that it's branded content. It provides entertainment value. The metrics were sick on this thing. Users would spend 12 to 15 minutes inside the, essentially, ad browsing this content. Now, the content was great, too, which is important for any ad. But this is, again, really this point where the performance orientation and the targeting of web advertising really meet halfway with the creative and the sort of energy. And this, keep in mind, this was done almost 2 years before iAd. So we had been thinking about the space for a long time. Another example of a branded experience inside the Xbox app. This was actually just last month, the official app of the launch of the Ford Fiesta. Again, nobody has to install anything. It just sort of integrates a Ford Fiesta experience right there inside your Xbox app. You can watch videos of all the features. There's social media interop. You can browse photos of the car. You can save them to your home screen. There's a lot of cool capabilities, but it's about thinking about branded content in the context of an app, which is very powerful. So this thing that we call Brand Blast, a big part of it was first thinking about, how do you sell this type of advertising, and how does it express itself inside an app? So first of all, how do we sell it? This is sold typically as a 50 or 100% share of voice, time-based sponsorship of an app. So for example, that example I gave with Mercedes and Motor Trend was a real example, where Mercedes, they wanted 50% share of the voice of that app for a number of months. I think that was 6 months. That was a really deep, engaged buy. So as a result, we built hooks in the app to be able to be scanned by remote control without even going back through the Apple certification process. So when the app is loading, you get this really nice kind of custom crafted launch screen indication. The home screen dashboard has this sexy bug that's sort of a home screen bug to take you directly into the branded content for Mercedes. That can be remotely controlled and changed day to day, week to week, based on the different sponsorship campaigns. And then you have this nice little popover interstitial that after a very scientific 4.5 seconds settles down. The creative is designed so that it lives on the top 50 pixels alone. And then if you actuate on either of these, it takes you into this brand blast inside the app, never throws you over the wall to a browser. You can watch video content, you can do photos, stuff like that. And it's really, again, an app within an app. It's really engaged content. And there's tons of examples. We've actually done a bunch of campaigns with Microsoft as an advertiser as well. Bing actually launched the official app for Parenting Magazine last month, and then Office came and sponsored it after that. And again, it's just really beautiful and organic placement inside the content. And we have in-house creative that really lovingly crafts these brand placements in partnership with the agency of the brand to make sure that it's really lush and is not disruptive to the user, but also provides real value and engagement. And users love it because they get more free apps, so it has value. So back to this discussion about kind of this new segment. Now I think hopefully you have some context for what this mobile engagement type advertising is, and Steve Jobs can give you a bunch of other examples. And I know that the Windows Phone 7 team, powered by Silverlight, is partying on a lot of other kind of these types of ads. But I actually think that this is one of the most hot segments of advertising to track. Just if we look at how our revenue split percentage has shifted over the last 4 years, it's dramatically shifted in this direction. People recognize that branded apps, advertisements, don't actually perform very well because you don't get many users, because not many people are going to search the App Store for the, insert brand for their app. Whereas mobile engagement is very important. Search and local will continue to be important. Microsoft has strong presence in Bing, obviously, and knows a lot about that space, but we really believe in this mobile engagement app within an app segment. So then what? So if you decide you're focused on this segment, I want to spend time talking about some of the mechanics that it takes to be successful in this business, because it's a very complex space, and it's keyword advertising. There are other advertising types that are largely self-service from the perspective of the advertiser, but this requires a fair amount of creative and technical kung fu to really deliver on this value proposition in the ways that I've demonstrated. So again, the value proposition is really, it's a dating service between brands and audience, brands and content. Whether it's between Ford and Xbox, or between Today's Show and Unilever, how do you do this? So there's these things that we call catalysts. There's a couple important catalysts to make this happen. It is not fire and forget, sort of if you build it, they will come type of advertising. So the first is the publishing strategy. The challenge with this is time frame, because you'll get an RFP for an ad buy that comes in incredibly hot. They might want to have an ad in the market in 6 weeks from today, and you'll get an insertion order for that kind of advertising. Then we have to scramble, identify a publisher, collaborate with their editorial team, build the app, run it through QA, publish it to Apple, get them to launch it and promote it in 6 to 8 weeks, which is crazy. So we actually have worked to refine a system for doing this quickly and then starting over to continue to refine the content. So this is, I guess, if you're in the mobile advertising business and you're interested in mobile engagement advertising, you are in the mobile content business. You just have to be. You have to be able to connect those dots. It's very important. The second thing is, obviously, as you will appreciate, there is a platform component of this. There's a lot of technology behind the scenes that makes this happen. So we've invested in feed processing technology. We have over 20 patents on mobile content specifically, both on the client and on the back end across multiple platforms. You need to have a publishing platform, because you can't build a good iPhone app really in 4 weeks, or in some cases in 2 weeks, in order to get into the App Store in 4 to 6 weeks. So we have invested in platform technologies to be able to make that happen. That sort of content platform technologies are very, very important. And the last thing is having the right kind of sales strategy. And I want to make it a point to call out how good Microsoft sales teams are at this. Specifically, the MSNBC team, the MSNBC.com team here on campus, the joint venture between Microsoft and NBC, the interactive sales professionals there understand mobile engagement really, really well, and they've been very good at monetizing our content and their content together with MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and Today Show and Meet the Press, and all those were sold collaboratively with them. Microsoft Advertising also. I mentioned that some of the properties that are not even Microsoft properties are actually sold by Microsoft Advertising. And again, they get it. They understand this segment. They understand how to sell it, particularly as part of an integrated buy. And Mobi also has our own kind of kind of regional sales team that also sells into these properties. And we have inventory management professionals that balance between these. So it's a very exciting time with regard to the fact that this is a new segment of advertising. It's expanding rapidly. It helps to inform what's going to happen next. And I actually think that it's an interesting commentary about software sponsored by advertising. I mean, it really has changed the way we think about revenue. We no longer do any work for hire work. 100% of our revenue comes from advertising sponsored properties like that. And it's not just banner ads. It's really engagement advertising. Yeah.
None of the examples you showed were performance advertising, right? They seem more like brand engagement advertising. Mountain Dew, Mercedes, but like, is there a performance part there, or is there like...
Great question, totally. I actually didn't show Bing because I didn't have the creatives late last night. I apologize. But the Bing campaign was very performance-oriented, right? It was to try and draw downloads of the Bing iPhone app. And it was very successful. I believe that campaign ran in 183 mobile placements, and the parenting app placement scored second in terms of conversions into app installs. This model works better for performance as well, just because you as a user are always more likely to click on an ad that's integral to the app. Also, because we have it's brand targeted, that Bing creative ad only ran on the parenting app. So as a result, our creative team, the creative was about baby names. It was like, search for the best baby names, you know? And they're like, I want to know what the most popular baby names are. You tap on it, you just install the Bing app. So it's like, there's a series of techniques for driving performance. We've also done some hotel and restaurant work that was performance-oriented that also performed very well in terms of actual bookings. But it is true that the majority of these types of campaigns are brand-oriented advertising. And those are the big portion of the budget as well, which is nice. So I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple things, sort of talking about what happens next. I was, specifically requested that I talk a little bit about Windows Phone 7 because we're partying on that platform right now, and we're honored to be on the early developer program for Windows Phone 7. I'll sort of speak about the platform in the context of mobile advertising. First of all, I think that it's a credible superphone offering, and it's really exciting to see the team have taken such dramatic steps, both in terms of the visual language of the platform that clearly skews away from the field, but also in terms of the way that you create apps for it. I mean, I think it's a very credible effort in this space, and I'm anxious to see how it plays out in the marketplace, and we're excited to be partners in that space. In terms of as a platform for advertising, I'll candidly say that I'm incredibly conflicted because on one hand, I think one of the most exciting, bold, and important things that's happening at Microsoft is this effort to try and think about design and engineering workflows, specifically Expression, Blend, Silverlight. As a user, those things are exactly what I've been asking for a decade. Getting design and engineering synchronized from day one and taking products to market more quickly, using vector assets, using real animatics, not flash prototypes. I mean, it's all the things that we've been talking about. So it certainly makes sense that this platform will be so tightly coupled to Silverlight as a platform. Having said that, it's a really tough time to evangelize the world on a plugin style architecture at a time when people are ripping Flash out of their sites to address superphones and iPads and other devices. It's a really tough time for that. So again, I'm incredibly conflicted about that. And as an advertiser on this platform, I did want to use this opportunity just to, and I know that Microsoft understands this, but don't underestimate the power of Don't underestimate the power of HTML5. This is an important trend in the marketplace. And I totally appreciate that Silverlight is an important platform strategy. And believe me, I know more than most that this is a platform culture. I spilled a lot of blood on those battlefields. But in the context of mobile, HTML5 is the way that we address our advertising across all these platforms, because every one of the superphone devices that I put up before renders HTML5 beautifully. And in fact, a lot of the content itself is actually rendered using HTML5 canvas. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there. And shockingly, there's no tool chain to be found for really good design-centric HTML5. So I guess my request is that the world desperately needs great tools for HTML5. Microsoft builds great tools. I understand that there's a lot of platform momentum behind Silverlight internally, but I think that for mobile, this is an incredibly important trend in terms of a ground truth of the way that people are going to create mobile advertising. So much so that we've actually invested in porting HTML5 Brand Blast to Windows Phone 7, specifically so that we can address cross-platform campaigns when the platform goes live. And that was no small amount of work for us, but it's just super, super important. So I just want to mention that. And again, I fully appreciate the platform perspective, but that's the one thing I wanted to mention, yeah.
Have they really optimized the HTML5 engines for multitasking? Like, for example, if, let's say there are 4 apps running HTML5 ads, and each of them is loaded HTML5 in the browser, and now you're really swapping between those things. Have you guys like really gone down that far?
We haven't had any issues, and again, most of the operating systems, sort of, there's a broker higher in the system that sort of handles memory management, and it does it quite well. And usually the first thing to go are browser canvases. Even if you have multiple browser windows open inside the browser, it'll kill those tasks, sort of autonomously. So we've never had an issue at all. In the context of a branded app, only one brand blast is going to be running at a time. So it's really not an issue or not a concern for us. Good question. So anyways, that was sort of one point that I wanted to say, is that HTML is going to be important for mobile. So let me stop talking for a while. The timing is good. I wanted to make sure that we had at least 20 or 30 minutes for an audience-driven dialogue about any questions that you have about this space, mobile advertising in general, engagement mobile advertising in specific, or mobile more broadly. So yes.
How do you imagine? You must have thought about this. How do you plan to compete with iAd, or especially iAd goes together with App Store and such?
Sure, yeah. So iAd is obviously an important driver in this industry. To date, it's been actually kind of good for us because iAds are extremely expensive, and so there's a lot of buyers who either don't have, a 7-figure budget to address, iAd, but they might have they might want to do this kind of engagement advertising. But more importantly, iAds are, not for the faint of heart from a development standpoint, whereas brand blasts are very straightforward to build. So we get a lot of we've gotten, rising tide lifts all ships in this space. And iAd has helped kind of bring attention to the other engagement-oriented advertising inventories that are out there. There's another important characteristic, which is that, with regard to targeting, we're not typically doing these ads in a run-of-network way, the way that iAd does. So, Nissan might go to Apple and say, we want this general audience, and Apple will insert iAds across a selection of apps that include, that are in that audience or in that demographic. We provide very targeted experiences to the point where oftentimes the creatives themselves are precision crafted for a specific branded property. So this is also important if you're Motor Trend, because if you're Motor Trend and you don't want to sell advertising, you want your ad sales team to sell the Motor Trend mobile app in partnership with us, which you can do with Brand Blast. You can sell an ad to only express itself in one app in the universe in a very targeted way. And so that's another thing that we have, from a business perspective, we're kind of run like a 1960s television network where we're really marrying up the advertisers with the shows in that very direct way, but without the drinking, or with less drinking at least. Good question. Yeah.
How far do you see the intrusiveness of these ads going? I mean, have you guys, from a UX perspective, do the users clearly distinguish that this is different from the app? Like the Mountain Dew ad, it is highly integrated into the platform. They look like the same tiles. Do they care? Do they feel a sense of intrusion, or lose trust if they actually discover it later on? Have you guys done a lot of work in this space?
Yeah, the web has paved the way for that. So sort of the and actually television as well now, right? It's like you never know if it's actually a prop or if it's product placement, right? So and massive with video games. I mean, all these things are sort of blurring the line between content and advertising, which is important in the economics of the ad ecosystem. We do, we're sort of culturally very user-centric. So we do, for example, we vetoed a lot of ad types that are very popular on other ads. Like, for example, when you tap on an article and you want to read and you get accosted by an overlay video. Pre-roll video is one thing because you're watching a video, but getting accosted by a video before you get to the text of the ad, we think that's pretty intrusive, so we don't do those types of ads. There's a bunch of types of ads that I think we've chosen not to do. All of our ads are kind of in a very kind of they have a specific place inside the app. In the case of the Xbox app, there's 1 to 2 brand channels that are designated for branded content. And even though it's right above or right below the social media content, it is its own self-contained, channel of content. So I mean, there are some choices that we've made to try and segment that out. But it's a delicate dance, and it's a line that we all walk. And we haven't, if you look at the reviews of our apps, because they're free, people don't tend to complain about that. And the ads are also, I find it annoying as a user when I get ads on my iPhone for ringtones and wallpapers and things that I don't care about. But I don't mind as much if it's like a really lush brand presentation from a top-tier brand, which is all that we do. Yeah.
So all these apps are in effect standalone. Are you partnering at all with the carriers to look at new ways of even using some of the advertising to offset data plans, or working more directly with the carrier?
Sure, we did in a previous life, in the sort of Zenzui days. That was central to the conversation, was trying to figure out how to feed advertising back into the operators in some kind of an organic and elegant way. That the carriers, that was difficult, as I'm sure you've experienced. There's a lot of complexities, moving parts, privacy rules. I mean, I think one of the things that it's difficult to overstate the significance of the shift that the App Store created in that frictionless distribution channel. But that's also not pronouncing the carriers obsolete. They provide an incredibly valuable channel, and they're going to have new, faster, better networks for serving these types of campaigns. And I don't, to answer your question, we had a lot of interaction with carriers in a previous life. We don't even go to 3GSM now. Our relationship is directly with the publishers and with the users. So.
Yeah, it looks like right now a lot of these things have like a 5 to 6 week lead time for you to create a new app. Some place like DoubleClick acts as a sort of, clearinghouse for lots of people to invest into, and then it puts it out into many different networks. Have you thought about that model or discarded that model? So it's have essentially, you've got a bunch of things with places that people can go in there and then it figures out by auction or however where to put those products.
Yeah, I'm totally not discounting the value of that model. Right. That will always be a huge part of the way advertising is bought. The question was, what about kind of ad networks like DoubleClick or, AdMob or those types of models where it's just like you throw a banner creative up or throw a text string up and, sorry, I'll be missing the project status meeting. Throw a banner up, that stuff is hugely important, but there's a lot of people partying in that space right now, right? So it's like we are much more interested in the engagement side of the equation, and that's partly because of where we came, the route that we came into this business. There will always be that channel of buying advertising, but that channel of buying advertising isn't right for every campaign. So we're kind of focused on the other type of campaigns. Yes.
So, I wanted to get your views on the future of marketplaces or app stores. Did you encounter a problem with your current model where you are downloading additional functionality without going through Apple's process? Do you have a problem with agreeing to their App Store agreement? And where do you see app stores going into the future in order to enable things like, of course with HTML5 you won't have this problem, but
sure.
With submitted apps you do.
No, it's a great question. And to your point, I think there's a great soundbite from Forbes where they said, a funny thing happened on the way to the mobile web. This crazy app thing happened, an app phenomenon, and sort of locally cached applications. And I believe that 5 years from now, you won't really be able to distinguish the user experience from HTML5 interactives to native apps. They'll be hardware accelerated, they'll have location-based services, they'll have, kind of robust functionality. But the app stores, what they've been incredibly good at is this concept of curation, right? So, one of the things that Apple does very well is they have a team of creative professionals that look at every app that's submitted, and it bubbles up the stack, and they promote every Thursday. The App Store flips over, and you can see new apps that are promoted by them. And as a user discovery mechanism, it's a very credible act of curating the sea of apps so that you can you can kind of identify the right app. So that is one thing, and we have a monthly call with Apple where we tell them what brands are coming to the App Store, and we work very closely with their team to be able to curate that content together with them. But we haven't actually had any gripes about the App Store as a kind of funnel. Because we're the publisher and the creator of the app, we're still able to capture our usability statistics so that we can tune the app. We've never had an app decline for reasons that we thought were inappropriate. So I think we have been pretty happy with that channel, and I'm not on the short term concerned about the App Store being a limitation for us, because any limitations, the biggest limitation for us is just approval time. If someone wants to go live on a date, we can't guarantee that because there's a queue. But the trade-off of having our app be promoted if it's good enough and get the lift of additional users discovering it and using it far outweighs the obvious negative aspects of having a curated system. So I think that's one of the cool things. If you compare Apple's approach to Google's approach, for example, Google culturally is submitted, it's in the App Store 13 seconds later, it's sort of everybody can submit things. And they also have a curation cycle. But Apple thinks much more like, again, a television network of finding, it's a hit-driven business, find the hits, promote those apps, and help, to validate that as a media channel, which is great for advertisers and great for us. So we've been pretty happy with that as a channel. Yeah?
So have you thought of anything? So Steve was asking about the double-click model, where basically you have this explosion of possible combinations of publisher and advertiser, right? Whereas you guys have this really nicely tailored one-to-one thing. Have you thought of something in between, maybe, where you have another layer in between so you can kind of scan your content to fit multiple publishers?
We have, and this isn't live yet, but we're actually. Everything that I showed you here were apps that were published, that were coded, on Fifth and Pike, and sort of in Seattle, lovingly crafted by our team. We're now galvanizing Brand Blast as an SDK so that we can actually get it out into more different apps. And these will still be individual apps that we have a relationship with. They'll still be very targeted, so you're buying that app. The only difference is we'll be able to address a larger body of apps, still using our exact same creatives and our exact same Brand Blast format and the exact same places in the app, just by apps written by other people. So for example, there are some categories of apps that our platform doesn't address, games, for example. Well, we'd love to be able to sell advertising. If somebody's buying on Xbox, they should be buying on whatever, insert your favorite game. So that's a way for us to, that's a little bit of a hybrid model between the breadth of DoubleClick and the focus of the Mobi network. And that, I think, is going to be out in, sort of Q4 of this year. We'll start to do those types of syndication partnerships with other advertisers. Very insightful question. So, great questions. How many of you, just by show of hands, work in mobile in some capacity? Okay. And how many of you work in mobile advertising? Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Well, again, I really appreciate your hospitality. Oh, yeah, go ahead, one more.
Are you going to also have Mobi on Android?
Actually, we have Mobi on Android now. And in fact, we'll be launching a collection of apps on Android later this year. But right now, we have one of the top football apps, together with our partner Sporting News. We have one of the top NASCAR apps, which I know is a area of personal interest to you. And I'm kidding. And so we have a bunch of really great apps in the Android app marketplace now, but that will be expanding this year. Again, thanks for your hospitality and for the insightful questions. I really appreciated your time.